Hi guys, it's Grace with Grace Gets Gastric, and I am here today for a non-weight loss related video today, and that is my 2019 Q4 book review slash wrap up. So if you guys have been following along for a while, you know how much I love to read. And so every 3 months, I like to post a little bit of a wrap up of the books that I read over the past quarter, the past 3 months, talking about my favorites, the ones that I enjoyed, and the ones maybe that weren't so great. So if you are interested in reading books, all of that stuff, you can go ahead and keep on watching. So to start off, we will go ahead and talk about the great books. So the books that I read in the past 3 months that I absolutely loved. I'll scoot over so I can display. The first is Gender Outlaw by Kate Bornstein. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. And it was a really fascinating book. I listened to it on audio, and it's narrated by the author, and she does an amazing job. And I've talked before about how I enjoy reading about various social justice issues, particularly ones that maybe don't even directly apply to me, just so that I can increase my knowledge and awareness and be a better ally. And so this was really talking about gender, both in terms of gender identity, biological gender, the sort of gender as a social construct. And it talks obviously a lot about transgender. The author is a transgender woman who transitioned in like the 70s, maybe like a while ago, and also did actually have a sex change operation. So she talks a lot about that and just her experiences, and it was really fascinating. So if you are interested in learning more about that kind of thing, that is definitely a book I would recommend. And she wrote it a while ago, I want to say in the 90s, and then she re-released it fairly recently in the past, 5-10 years with maybe 5. Kind of updating some of the terminology just because that has evolved since she first wrote it. So I would definitely recommend reading the updated version. The next book or set of books that I really loved was the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. The first is, I want to say the Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And these are sci-fi books, and there is a set. Currently, there are 3 out. I believe there's a 4th in the making. I am currently listening. I listened to these on audiobooks. The narrator was fabulous. But I'm currently listening to the 3rd book, so I cannot recommend it officially. But I've read the first 2, and they were brilliant. So I really love sci-fi fantasy. But I do find sometimes with sci-fi is that it can be a little dense and just a little obscure and hard to really get into. Because for me personally, I really enjoy character-driven books. I mean, I obviously love a good plot, but I do like books where I can really connect with the characters. And sometimes with sci-fi, that isn't the case. This is very much character-driven. And the author just does a really great job with world building in a way where she's able to convey all of the intricacies of this world, of the aliens, the different cultures, without getting bogged down in exposition. She finds these clever ways to really make sure that the reader has all the information they need without making it feel like you're just reading pages and pages of exposition explaining things. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it's one of my favorite sci-fis that I've read recently, or even not so recently, and it was, yeah, it's just brilliant. So if you're into sci-fi, I highly recommend. The next book is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, and it is a nonfiction book, so it's Data Bias in a World Designed by Men, I believe is the subtitle, but it was fascinating. So obviously, like, as a woman in society, I am very aware of the fact that the world was designed by and for white men, but it was really interesting to learn more about that, learn about the actual data gaps when it comes to information on how women live their lives, on basically anything to do with women. No one is doing the research, no one is collecting the data, and so there's just nothing there to pull from. And it was really interesting to see sort of the level. You don't even necessarily realize how deeply this impacts the lives of everyone, but in particular women, the fact that the world was designed explicitly without them in mind, without their particular needs and challenges. So it was really interesting. I mean, a little frustrating, obviously, just to realize the depth to which this impacts us, but it's not like we were unaware of it to begin with. But I did really find it super, super interesting. The next is another sort of nonfiction book, and it is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. So this is a book, I actually think it's becoming like a series with Eva Longoria or something. It's going to movie or television or something, but I wasn't really sure what to expect with this one, but I actually was really impressed. It was really well written. It is kind of nonfiction. It's a therapist talking about her, you know, she kind of talks about some specific patients, and she also talks about her experience going to therapy. But of course she changes things for privacy reasons, all of that. But it was a fairly, you know, very moving book, very well written. Definitely has reinforced that I need to go back to therapy, which I already knew, but I do think it did a great job of kind of, you know, like talking not only about the importance of therapy, but the importance of finding a therapist that you click with. And I don't know, I just really found it interesting and informative in terms of informing my own thoughts on finding a therapist for myself. So yeah, if you're thinking about into therapy, I definitely would recommend that one. Next is the final book in a trilogy that I mentioned, I believe, in my first or second book roundup, but it is Supernova, which is the third book in the Renegades trilogy by Marissa Mayer. And this is a young adult book that, it's like in the superhero genre, so it's kind of sci-fi fantasy-ish, but, you know, superpowers, etc. And I really loved the first two books. I really loved the third book. Obviously, there were a few things I had little tiny quibbles with, but overall, I was really impressed. Another one I listened to an audiobook. The narrator was brilliant, and Marissa Mayer is very talented at building these plots and these worlds where you're just like, I cannot possibly see how this will end well for the characters. And then she manages to pull it off, and you're like, wow, that was brilliant. I did not see that coming. I did not know how you were going to get us there. So, yeah, I really liked it. It was a really fun book. And a great one of those. I mean, it's definitely not necessarily light. There are some very deep and heavy themes and content, which I appreciate in young adult books. I think that we don't need to be dumbing things down over much. So, yeah, I don't know. I really enjoyed it. Next, we have a book that was actually recommended by one of you, by Michelle, Hello VSG 2016, and that is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. She recommended this to me in, I think, my last book roundup, and I remember when Chanel, when her BuzzFeed statement went up, this was the, if you remember Brock Turner, the Stanford swim star, and the sexual assault against, at the time, Jane Doe, she released a BuzzFeed statement, a victim impact statement, and I remember how impactful that was at the time. I want to say 2017, maybe 2017, I think. Anyways, this is a book by her talking about that whole experience kind of from start to finish, and I thought it was really well written, very eloquent. I think it touches on a lot of points, again, regarding being a woman in society now, dealing with rape culture, the impact of sexual assault. I found it really meaningful, really beautifully written. And so definitely one of those books that I kind of think everyone should read, because I think it is a little bit too easy for people to dismiss these incidences and the effect that they have. So yeah, great read. And then the last book in my great category is So You Want to Talk About Race. This is obviously a book about race and racism. It is really wonderfully written. And another one of those books that I really do think everyone should read. Not always easy to, I mean, it was definitely thought-provoking. And, you know, as a person who is white and who benefits from my skin color, whether or not I want to, that is just a fact of life. I've been raised in a racist society. There is, I work actively to combat that because I try to be very aware of it, and I try to read books that can perhaps shed light on my bias. But it's inevitable that we're going to make mistakes, and I think that this was a really well written and I mean, I wouldn't say comprehensive in that it's certainly not the only book that one should be reading about race and racism, but it is definitely a great starting point. Yeah, like I said, I do think I wish that more people would be reading books like this, because it is something that we don't talk about enough openly. And I understand why that is to an extent, because these are hard conversations to have, but I do think that they need to be had. So yeah, I really recommend that one. I thought it was really great. I've recommended it to a lot of real people, people in my real life as well. So yeah, great book. All right, now we are on the good section. And this first book was actually also recommended to me by somebody on one of my past videos. And oh my God, I meant to look up who it was. I totally have forgotten. So if it was you, thank you. But it is The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. I've actually had this book on my to-read list for a long time. I had a few people in real life had recommended it to me, but having her rec on my video made me prioritize it. And I did really enjoy it. I didn't go crazy in love with it like almost every single person who's read it who told me to read it did go. God, that was weirdly said. But basically everyone and their mother said that this was the best thing since sliced bread, and I did really, really like it, but I didn't love it. But I did enjoy it immensely. It is, if you're familiar with Genesis, with kind of the Bible, some Old Testament, I think it has been a long time since I've been super familiar with those stories. And I think if I had been more familiar with them, I would have gotten more out of this, because I did obviously recognize some things, but I think if I had been a little bit more familiar, I think that would have enhanced my enjoyment. But I did really enjoy it, and I would definitely recommend for people who are kind of fans. I mean, it's not quite, I wouldn't quite call it historical fiction, but it is sort of that. I'm really into like mythological retellings like Circe and Achilles and Patroclus and, Iliad, Odyssey, that kind of stuff. And so this is sort of in a similar vein. The next book is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson, and this is a nonfiction book that is told in a very interesting way. It is told almost as a novel, and so it reads like a novel, so it was very engaging and interesting, but it is talking about Chicago during the World Fair that was there in like the late 1800s, and also talks about there was a serial killer at the time thought to be one of the first serial killers. So it was kind of interweaving those storylines, and I thought it was pretty interesting, especially because it was not a topic I was particularly interested in beforehand. It was a book that was given to me, and I'm trying to work through the books that I already own, and so I read it just for that reason. It's not a book that I would have picked out for myself, but I was surprisingly intrigued by it all. So definitely an interesting one. Next, we have Inconspicuous Consumption by Tatiana Schlossberg, and this is a book on basically the fact that our planet is dying. So it's all about sustainability or the lack thereof, and it was written in a very easy to consume way. The book is broken up into different parts, and within those sections, like there's a section on fashion, and within fashion, she just talks about a couple of different things in fashion, because obviously you can't talk about everything in every book. But I did think it was a really, interesting read. And as someone who is really concerned about global warming, I have added a lot of books on that topic to my shelf. Next, we have a book that was on my Pulitzer Prize winner list. I'm trying to read all of those. And it is Angle of Repose by Wallace Stagner. This whole time I was calling it Angel of Repose. But it's Angle, so there's that. But I thought that this was also very interesting. I did not have like super high hopes. It kind of sounded boring to me, but I'm trying to read them all. But I did think that it was beautifully written and quite poignant, and definitely I can see why it won the Pulitzer Prize. So yeah, I really liked it. It was enjoyable. Next we have On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous by Oscar Vuong. Oh God, I can't see what I wrote. I wrote something very badly. So I think that's a V, but it might be a W. So this was really another one of those beautifully written books. It's almost, I would call it almost poetry prose. It was very lyrical. It was, this author is a poet, and this is their first novel. And so you can definitely tell that the prose is very beautiful, very lyrical, very symbolic at times. And it is, yeah, it was very moving and very beautifully written. I do think in some ways that lyricism prevented me from really deeply connecting with the story, and I wasn't quite sure what the central like thrust of the novel was. So that was why I didn't say it was great, but I'm definitely very glad I read it. It was very, like I said, very beautifully written. And then the last book on the good list is Dear Girls by Ali Wong. So I love Ali Wong. She is a comedian. I actually went and saw her last year in person, and she was great. So I really like her. When I saw she was coming out with a book, I was super excited. I picked it up on audio because, particularly with books that are read by the author, I tend to enjoy listening to them. And it was really funny. I would say like it wasn't the best thing I've ever read, but it is rare that a book by like a comedian is going to be great for me. I mean, I generally enjoy them. They're enjoyable, but it's not like they're life-changing. But if you enjoy Ali Wong's humor, if you like her, I would definitely recommend giving this a read. And if you can do audio, listening to it was fun because you just hear it in her own voice. All right. And then the last section here are the bad. So I just have a few books. I actually lucked out. I feel like most of the books I read in the past year were at least okay, or the last 3 months. But the first is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So she has written a bunch of books in this, I want to say it's called the Grisha verse. And so she has like a main series, and then this was, I think, like a spin-off series. It was a 2-book series. So this is the first one. And I only read the first one because I just couldn't make myself read the second one. So I read this because I was looking for more books that were kind of like queer fantasy sci-fi. And I mean, the characters... It's an ensemble cast, and there are 2 characters, 2 male characters that get together eventually, but like there wasn't even a hint or whisper of romance in this first book, so I guess it all happens in the second book. But anyways, the whole reason I read this book was for something that wasn't even in it, so that kind of annoyed me, but mostly I just didn't enjoy it. Like almost every single character is just terrible. Mostly the main character that we're supposed to care. He's supposed to be like an anti-villain, an anti-hero, but he was just a dick, and like there was nothing, hero-y about him. I just didn't care about him at all, and I didn't know why everyone else did. And there were a bunch of other issues I had with the book, but I just didn't enjoy it. It was just not for me. So yeah, that was a pass. It was kind of disappointing because I was looking forward to it, but there you go. The next is The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, and I didn't like hate this one. I just thought it was such a slog. And there were definitely, I can see why it was important. I understand. I wanted to read it because, it is a historically important book in particularly the feminism movement. And there were things that actually rang quite true for me now with people that I know who are perhaps suffering from the problem that has no name. But I just thought it was so long and so boring and very dense. And it was just, yeah, it was like pulling teeth reading it. So I'm glad that I did. I will never read it again. And then finally, the last book or books on this list are the Earthsea Cycle books, book 1 and 2 by Ursula K. Le Guin. I didn't like these. I've only read the first 2 so far. I think the first one is A Wizard of Earth and Sea, A Wizard of Earthsea. The title is there. But I didn't enjoy it. I've been wanting to read some of this author's works. She is widely known as writing some of the first sci-fi. I really want to read Left Hand of Darkness, but I thought I would start with her young adult series because I love young adult fantasy books, and they were faster to read and they were very short in audiobooks. So I thought that would be just an easier place for me to start with some of her works. And I was not impressed. They're so short and they move so quickly that it just is impossible for me to connect to the characters. And as I mentioned before, I am someone who prefers character-driven or character-heavy plots, and this was just really light on the characters, and I just didn't care about them at all, and it made it hard for me to care about what was happening in Earthsea. So I will probably read the rest in this series just because they are so short, and I'm kind of holding out hope that they'll get better, but I think this is overall not going to be something that I loved. All right, guys, this was a little bit longer than I intended. Sorry for that, but what else is new. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you, you know, stuck through to the end. I know not everyone here is a big reading fanatic like me, but I do like to share some of my other interests here on my channel. Let me know what you guys have been reading and loving in the comment section down below. And if you've read any of the books that I talked about, let me know what you thought of them. And I think that's everything. I will talk to you all very soon.